So today we are gonna go into a bit of React documentation and we're gonna learn how React works. So let's just head on to React documentation and see what we can find. So, or I'm gonna show you a bunch of things as a web developer to learn. Uh, so yeah, React basically created a new documentation which is React version 19 point 2. We are at React version 19.2 now. So the quick start, you will basically learn 80% of React concepts. So first is React is all about components. Okay, so let's just see draw.io. Okay, so traditionally our pages had HTML, CSS and JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, which was a bit of so basically we had HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, so this was our web technologies, but then all of this was very cumbersome to manage because for HTML you have to write one document structure and it can get messy, and then you have to link style sheets and then you have to link script tags. So this whole process of asset management and data management inside and to make dynamic web applications was becoming cumbersome. So most of the teams, so Facebook developed React. So all of this HTML, CSS, and JavaScript got, there is a beautiful thing called Webpack. Okay, so Webpack came, and Webpack was able to basically bundle all of the HTML, CSS, JavaScript into one as and manage them as assets. And then React was a library, right? React is a library that is at version 19.2 now, which we're going to learn today. But we need to understand the fundamentals that uh, all of our React projects, right? They are sort of working on the functionality of something called components. So component you can understand as a black box, which is like something to be rendered on the screen that holds its uh, state state management. Okay, so its state, and then its UI. So UI was controlled by JSX, and JSX is basically JavaScript XML, but it is a notation to it's basically a superset of HTML plus CSS stylings to treat as a functional. React basically follows functional programming and declarative programming paradigms, but you can write your JavaScript logic for state management and you can describe declaratively your UIs. Okay, so everything in React is a component hierarchy, right? So now you can define all of these things, but your React application, once it becomes uh, say it becomes a mid-tier application or it becomes a large application, so you need to understand a few fundamental concepts. So first is uh, the use of SPAs, single page application and multi-page applications. So single page application is faster because you can basically control your rendering as part of your application, and basically you can make a web 2.0 web 2.0 application. Web 2.0 is something that is dynamic. Okay, there is also web 3, but web 2.0 is something dynamic, and web 2.0 basically says that web 2.0 basically says that all of my applications are dynamic in the nature, that its content can change based on user interaction, and user can basically do some sort of operations on the website, and that basically uh, is mutated. Whatever sort of mutations happen with the website, and all of the dynamic content can be managed by the user themselves. Okay, so it can be something like your checkouts or your e-commerce platforms or your SaaS dashboards or your analytics dashboards, or you can build pretty much everything with React, right? It can be, you can combine a bunch of libraries. So there's this thing called bundling. This is Webpack Bundler, right? And then there is this thing called uh, like the we'll get into more nuances of React and web development, but then there is one thing called which I wanted to understand, make you understand, was that so there is client side routing. Sorry, there's a bunch of libraries that work together with libraries, npm libraries or yarn libraries that work, npm libraries support that work along with React. So that is the part, right? So the npm libraries you can see, for example, let's just figure out a few. For example, there is a thing called, let's say, there is thing called Lodash. Lodash is a very good library for uh, providing bunch of functions that you can have in a small lightweight library. Then there is datefns for managing date related stuff. Then there is say uh, for animations and stuff, there is Framer Motion. Then there is Material UI. Material UI was a good library, but it has a lot of bloat. So people generally make their own atomic design systems. So we'll talk about design systems also, but basically there are a bunch of libraries that you can support with React. Okay, so there is this huge library support in React. Then uh, every application which is Web 2.2 application in that you generally write with React also has data data fetching. Okay, so there is bunch of concepts like uh, hooks, and then network layer concepts like REST APIs, and maybe like GraphQL APIs that you can work with. Or if you have a real-time chat application, then you can work with WebSockets. So there's a lot of things you can do with React. So this pretty much gives you a picture of what React is and how why is it used. It is a UI library for building user interfaces, right? So so the main goal of writing web applications is to build a performant UX. So we'll get into JavaScript and JS and JS internals and browsers. Okay, we'll get into JS internals and browsers, how profiling works, right? How profiling works, how basically performance analysis can be done, performance measure, how you can create budgets, and then maybe you can learn. There are a bunch of things I can throw at you, which is uh, what else can comes to mind. So there is one thing which is very important, is your core web vitals. Okay, right? Then uh, so there's a bunch of topics that you should know as a front-end engineer. Then there is component architecture, system design of front end, any front end, and then high level design and low level design. So yeah, this is a bunch of things that front end engineers should know. And then there are other things also. For example, you can go into unit testing, unit tests and unit tests and integration tests, which is your TDD, test driven development. Okay. Uh, yeah. So that is bunch of things. So we'll just limit our scope of discussion to React today. So everything is components in React. So before knowing React, you should know HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If you don't know, then you should revisit that. But the first thing is that, for example, this is a div tag that I'm rendering, static div tag, and then this is my button component. So this is something that I've declared somewhere else, right? And this functionality I can reuse again and again as a component every time I want. But this will be static throughout. I can mutate its behavior through props and state. I mean, I can control its behavior through props and state, but this is basically a component. Okay, so every component starts with a capital letter. So that is how the React knows that it's a React component, functional component, right? So this is how it shows. Welcome to my app, I'm a button. Okay. Now, if you're writing markup, right? This is JSX syntax. So JSX is a bit more but stricter than HTML, that is true. And then this is how you write JSX. So for example, you have an image tag, right? So if you want to supply a class to it, you will have to write in usual HTML, you will say class equal to something. But in React, you will say class name equal to something, right? And then this avatar you will define in your CSS and import it as a CSS module, separate CSS file. So let's say you have a variable in JavaScript called user, right? So if you want to access the username, you can say that, okay, this I can embed in curly braces. This is how I display a Java, HTML, I mean a variable inside an HTML. So this is the power of JSX, that it basically lets you template your HTML a bit. So it's sort of a template thing, right? So that's it. Now, now say you have a user, right? So you can say that you have user image URL, user name, user image size, okay, user. So this is the user you are showing, right? So yeah, this is how it shows on the screen. But again, you're showing an image, but you also need to show alt, for example. You should know that, right? And then src is something that you are showing, and then style is something that you're supplying, uh, right, as a style. And then as an avatar, you are basically styling it as with a class name, right? So this is how JSX works. You can basically provide this is a native image tag, right? And then you can provide these props into this, and these can be variables as well, or it can be variables, right? So this is how JSX works, right? Now there's a concept called conditional rendering. So every JavaScript state variable inside React, functional component block, would have some sort of you might need some logic. For example, if your user is authenticated, then you want to say that I want to show some certain markup, otherwise I want to show a different markup, right? So you can wrap that in an if. So usual way would be that you define your content variable, and then based on a condition you change your content variable, JSX. So this is our components. So components can be supplied to variables as well, can be stored as variables. So this is how you show your content. Okay. Now you can also use ternary operator for the same thing, and that will conditional operator for the same thing, and then that will also work inside JSX, which is a more compact way of writing conditional JSX. And if you don't need an else branch, then you can use logical and syntax, right? That will also make your component render based on whether the condition is true or false. So when it's true, it will render. When it's false, it will not render, right? Now say you have a list of elements. So if you have a product detail page and then you want to render some products, right? So product has your data. uh, the website has taken example to render products in a uh, basically render products as an array, right? A simple structure of title and IDs. So you can just do a map, and then you can store it. So basically, these are list items. Every thing that you want to render as a list should have a key. We'll come to why a key attribute is required, but basically these products will be rendered as list items. Okay. So see, every key has a list. Every li item has a key attribute. This basically helps React to know that okay, this element whenever it changes, I have to basically look into its key value to understand what change has been occurred in the DOM, right? So this basically lets you know how the items are gonna be inserted, deleted, or reordered, right? So this is the use of keys. Okay, so uh, for example I'm gonna have a product basically which is vegetables or fruits, and then I basically say that if it is a fruit, then I'm gonna color it as magenta, otherwise I'm gonna color it as dark green. So basically in the style attribute I am basically using conditional JavaScript to basically change the properties and then render it on the UI. Okay. Now events. So again, uh, coming back to my button function, my button React component, I want to add an event to it. So event on click would take a function that will return the handle click. So the handle click will be called, and then it will execute an event handler. So based on that, we can say that okay, this is the event that I want to process on the click of this button, right? So basically there can be different kind of events. For example, on click, on change, on mouse over, on mouse move, on mouse leave. Okay. And then on touch start, on touch end. So all of these events we can basically access through these gsx through the gsx attributes in the React. Okay. So this is our quick start. Now state is something that changes every time we want to trigger a change inside our component. Okay. So basically we can write some JavaScript logic to mutate our state, and based on that updated state we can process some logic and we can render things on the UI. So for example, this is a simple example of count state. We start with the 0 initial value, and then we say that okay, our count can be 0 or anything, but initial value is 0, but it can be anything, right? But it is a number. So the convention is to write the state name and then the state setter. Okay. And then based on that you can basically, for example, if I want to render clicked one time, two time, three time, four time, any number of times, then I can say that okay, click set the count as previous count plus one, and then that will on every click call count will increment, right? So this is the beauty of React. I can reuse this component any number of times and they will behave separately, logically isolated to each other, and then whatever functionality I've written in one component will be only in that its own scope. Okay, so to understand components you have to understand scopes. So whatever function you define has a scope of it, right? So similarly, this button, if you click on this button, count will be 0 initially. For this also it will be 0, but if you click on this one, then count will increment 1 for this one only, not for this one. Okay, but if you click on this one, then basically whatever you click on, count for that will be independently, isolatedly updated. Okay, so that is, for example, in this example, I click on this, it becomes 1 2, and then this becomes 1 2 3. So this is how both have independent states, right? Now let's just understand hooks. So useState is one of the hooks that is built in React. There are other kind of hooks also. For example, use callback, use memo, and use ref. Okay, so we'll understand those one by one, right? Now we have to share data between components. For example, every button has my own independent count. But then if you have to change the count state, right? So we just say that, okay, I want to increment the count of this one also, but this will update the count of this one also. So I have to lift the state up to this component so that it basically communicates the state to both of them, same state to both of them. Okay, right. So this is the least common component that I want to update to. So when you click either button, the count in my app will change, which will change both of the counts in my button, right? Okay, so now let's understand that every button we have provided a handle click function and a count, right? So now the count is common to both, right? Because it is defined in the my app component, and the functionality of the handle click is also common to both because we're passing the same function. So these two components are exact replica of each other, and every time we update count in one, it will update in other also, right? So this is called lifting the state up. Okay, so now we have shared it between two components. Now these components update together. When I click on one, it updates the other one. Okay, so now we basically know what are the basics of React. Let's just go into further learning of React, right? So let's just see a tutorial of tic-tac-toe. So